Reportedly, President Trump has warned Turkey's President Erdogan, urging Turkey to de-escalate, limit its military actions, and avoid civilian casualties and increases to displaced persons and refugees. The White House reportedly said on Wednesday in a readout of Trump's call with Erdogan. He urged Turkey to exercise caution and to avoid any actions that might risk conflict between Turkish and American forces. Erdogan's reported response was equally harsh, as Erdogan demanded that the U.S. no longer support the Kurdish military. But today, Turkey is now refuting that response. Whatever the response, it's a war within a war. Turkish President Erdogan has ordered his troops to penetrate the Syrian border into the heart of Syrian Kurd territory in Afrin. After days of shelling, Turkish forces are now advancing into Afrin. Erdogan's aggression towards the YPG and PKK has had a long history that created a boomerang effect, causing Erdogan to weaken his own military and intelligence due to his ongoing purge. Additionally, Erdogan's tact has opened up international loathing across the board. The U.S. has long utilized the Kurds in the fight against ISIS.
Well, as you know, the U.S. is in Syria to defeat ISIS, and we've done that with a coalition of partners and the Syrian Democratic Forces in particular, which are comprised of Kurdish and Arab, but also elements of Christian forces. It is truly a multi-ethnic group of fighters who are defending their home territory. And so we are concerned about the Turkish incidents in northern Syria.
As Turkey has cloaked itself as anti-radical, but now that they're expanding into Europe, they're now basically going pure Wahhabist with the air gun and the rest of it, and they're announcing 80% military-age men going in to colonize, and the leaders are saying, we're colonizing Europe, and Erdogan has said, we're going to bring down Europe. In fact, if you don't fully capitulate, we'll burn Europe down. He said that about 6 months ago. So this is what the globalists and the EU has done. They're working with the Islamists to collapse Europe and have this total takeover.
Turkey should be very concerned to Americans. Erdogan is saying 1.5 billion Muslims are waiting for the Turkish government to rise.
The U.S. State Department had planned on training 30,000 Kurds, causing Erdogan to say he would strangle the effort before it could be born, and that the U.S. is playing with fire.
Know this, Erdogan said, this is a national struggle. We'll crush anyone who stands against us.
Of course, Bashar Assad and Iran are fuming due to Erdogan's intrusion into the Syrian conflict, while Russia maintains its presence and takes a wait-and-see approach. The Russians may know what many military analysts agree on. Turkey is on the verge of getting their butt kicked and having their fractured military decimated by the battle-hardened Kurds. Meanwhile, Erdogan gambles on the use of the Free Syrian Army to bolster his military after President Trump cut ties with the FSA after they showed little results for the CIA's investment. Ironically, the FSA, a CIA creation, is now openly fighting against the U.S. allied Kurds. Erdogan claims it will be over very quickly, but I don't think he understands what that means exactly. John Bound reporting for Infowars.com.
Syria's mountainous Barsaya region has become the site of intense clashes, with the Kurdish YPG militia pitted against Turkey and its Syrian rebel allies. The ridge overlooks the city of Azaz, which sits on the Syrian side of the Turkish border. We're just 3 kilometers from the front line of fighting here in the city of Azaz. We're actually on the road that links Afrin to the Turkish border. The people you can see behind me checking vehicles there, they're members of the Free Syrian Army, backed, armed and trained by Ankara. Their job is essentially to make sure there are no YPG fighters infiltrating Turkey via this route.
God willing, it's our job to protect civilians both here and later on in the city of Afrin. The Kurds are our brothers. What we're fighting against are the separatist ambitions of the YPG and the PKK.
We left the day before yesterday. We fled the airstrikes with our children. Men from our village came to protect our houses.
Turkey has promised to bring Operation Olive Branch to a swift conclusion. Capturing Barsaya would be a significant victory in the battle for Afrin.
President Trump issues a warning to Turkey, urging President Erdogan to be mindful of military actions in Syria that could spark a conflict between Turkish and American forces.
Well, President Erdogan, we understand your legitimate security concerns on your southern border, and we're going to work with you very closely to get through those concerns. But we also hope that you can see the longer-term strategic goals of having a peaceable Syria and not escalating any violence in northwestern Syria, and then helping the allied forces and the coalition against ISIS to gain better insight and vision into that part of Syria so that we can make better security assessments.
But Turkish officials dispute that President Trump voiced concerns about escalating violence. Joining me now, Ariel Cohen, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ariel, we have seen U.S.-Turkish relations go up and go down. How would you assess them at this moment in time?
We're at the lowest point in decades. There were periods when U.S. Imposed embargo on supply of weapons to Turkey when there were massive violations of human rights. But basically, we're facing a situation where Turkey, Russia, Syria, and Iran are coordinating policy and making the U.S. and our allies, the Kurds, more isolated. In the long term, what the Pentagon is saying is that we need a force in Syria to counter Iran. The Iranians are the real winners of the war in Syria. We did a lot of field work. We did a lot of heavy lifting, destroying ISIS, making Syria safe for Assad. This is exactly the opposite of what happened, the opposite of what the Obama administration wanted. They wanted to get rid of Assad and didn't do anything. Turkey now is targeting their traditional enemy, the Kurds. We are supporting the Kurds because the Kurds were our heavy lifters in the war against us.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. The Kurds have done so much to help the United States against ISIS, which obviously declared a war on the United States, helped wipe out ISIS essentially in Syria, and now their thank you is to come under attack from the Turkish government?
It is a little bit even more complicated than that because YPG, the forces that the Turks are attacking in Syria, are connected to PKK, which is a terrorist organization, and we recognize PKK as a terrorist organization. But the PKK is involved inside Turkey, YPG is in Syria. But beyond that, what is happening today is for the first time, the Turks are directly attacking American allies with the Air Force, with field artillery. I saw 155 millimeter field artillery in the footage you just showed. So this is bad news. We need to talk to the Turks. Turkey, remember, is our NATO ally, but they talk and they behave like they were not. For example, they're buying massive Russian anti-aircraft complex called S-400, one of the top-of-the-line missiles, but they're buying it from the Russians and not from a NATO member, and certainly not from the United States.
A NATO country shopping for arms with the Russians. That is pretty outrageous. Ariel Cohen, we have to leave it there. Thanks very much for your insights this morning.
Pleasure.
So the United States and our NATO ally Turkey in a standoff over Syria. President Trump spoke by phone with the Turkish president yesterday. Trump urging Turkey to scale back attacks on Kurdish forces, saying such moves threaten the fight against ISIS in the region. American officials say the battle in Syria is winnable.
Half of the territory of Syria is outside the control of the Assad regime, and I think that we see a path forward, although a tenuous one, that we have to attend to every day in Syria that might lead to a better, safer, more stable political solution. And so at this stage, we're maintaining our military presence, but we have a strong diplomatic plan, 5-point plan, and Secretary Tillerson's very engaged.
Now let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, a former Green Beret commander and counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Cheney, the author of Warrior Diplomat, and also running for Congress now in the Florida's 6th District. Glad to have you here. We had talked about this before, Michael, that you had all these different entities working together for a common goal to destroy ISIS, but there was no plan for what was going to happen afterwards. Listen to what the Wall Street Journal wrote today in this editorial page. Now that the U.S. and Kurds have done the dirty work, Russia, Syria, Turkey, and al-Qaeda want to push the U.S. out. If they succeed, Mr. Trump will pay a price in lost credibility on par with Mr. Obama's failure to enforce his famous red line on chemical weapons. Is that too strong or about right?
Well, I think it's certainly right that all of those actors would like to see the U.S. out of the way, and they would like to see Syria resolved in line with their own interests, some of which align, some of which don't. One of the things that I think that article really didn't touch on, though, was Iran's role, which has seen more in the way of gains in establishing that land bridge we've talked about from western Afghanistan through Iraq, through Syria, to Lebanon, to be able to threaten Israel in the Mediterranean. Iran has seen more gains in the last 10 years, particularly under the Obama administration, than in the last 1,000. So I don't think it really addressed that piece. But I think really what, the bottom line here is that the United States is going to have to remain engaged. I think President Trump was absolutely right to tell Erdogan and Turkey to knock it off and to back off. And at the same time, we're going to have to be very firm with the Kurds that there better not be a single Turkish civilian or soldier hurt, while we're working with them.
Let me ask you this. I've been curious to ask someone with experience on both on the military side and on the diplomatic side.
Right.
What do you think would happen, and would you advise President Trump to begin to have a conversation with NATO allies about removing Turkey from NATO?
No, not at this point. I would not. We have to continue to work with. The Turks. They're a critical ally in a number of ways, both in the terms of the size of their military, which is substantial and one of the largest in NATO, and then also its location. Everything from an intelligence assets to it being a choke point to the Black Sea. We have to work with the Turks. We have great relationships throughout their national security apparatus. Really, the problem is, in many ways, is Erdogan and the political piece that he has put in place.
Interesting.
But we have to keep, bottom line, we have to keep Turkey in the fold. We have to work this out and stay engaged.
All right. Well, I'll take that off my list of things that I think you should do. When it comes to the Kurds, do we owe them more than what they're getting from us right now?
Well, I think the Trump administration made a bold move in getting the Kurds some heavier weapons. That's how they were able to defeat ISIS once and for all as a state. Mind you, they are not defeated as a movement, but in terms of as a state, they are. And I think we need to keep, I think the policy is correct, keep a smaller group of advisors on the ground, supported by the Air Force and our assets, but that also keeps us as somewhat of a buffer between the Turks and the Kurds, and to keep the region from devolving against chaos, and finally shifting from ISIS to dealing with Iran. It's Sunni extremism to dealing now with Shia extremism.
All right. Thanks for bringing us your expertise. We appreciate it. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dana.
Turkish troops have been shelling targets across the Syrian border since Saturday, an attempt to remove the Kurdish forces who control the area around Afrin. The YPG militias have played a crucial role in defeating the Islamic State group in Syria as part of an American-backed coalition, which also includes France and the UK. Now, Washington must perform a diplomatic balancing act between its two allies.
We fully understand Turkey's concerns about different terrorist organizations. We understand their concerns about the PKK. So we're having conversations with the Turkish government about addressing those concerns, but also trying to bring stability and encourage them to de-escalate tensions in that part.
Turkey believes the YPG to have links to the PKK, which they consider a terrorist organization. But alliances between Kurds and Western powers urging Ankara to halt the offensive. In a phone call with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, French President Emmanuel Macron
repeated France's preoccupation regarding the serious degradation of the humanitarian situation in Idlib and western Ghouta provinces, ensuring without delay that civilian populations have access to humanitarian aid must remain an absolute priority.
But de-escalation seems unlikely. Turkey says Western allies haven't delivered on their promises and vow to extend their operations, which could bring them close to areas where U.S. troops are stationed.
For now, Afrin is the target, but in the future, we might also start operation in Minbic, also in eastern part of the Euphrates.
Donald Trump is set to speak with his Turkish counterpart on Wednesday. It remains to be seen if he will renege on his support for the Kurds or risk souring relations with a strong NATO ally.
Turkey's foreign minister has hit out at the U.S., saying he doesn't believe Washington is a trustworthy partner. It comes as tensions escalate between the two NATO allies over Turkey's offensive against the U.S.-backed Kurdish militia groups in northern Syria.
Hiçbir sözü tutmaması The US hasn't kept any promises. Mr. Trump told President Erdogan on the phone that no more weapons will be given to the YPG. We'd like to see that put into action.
Turkey's foreign minister also says the US has misrepresented what was said in a recent phone call between the two countries' leaders about the hostilities in Syria.
President Trump relayed concerns that escalating violence in Afrin, Syria, risks undercutting our shared goals in Syria. He urged Turkey to de-escalate, limit its military actions and avoid civilian casualties.
The White House statement about the content of the phone call between Trump and Erdogan was probably drafted before the conversation took place, because it did not reflect the truth.
The phone call came after Ankara announced it is extending its military operation in northern Syria and that it will not set its sights on the Kurdish-held city of Manbij. The US is said to have 2,000 troops in the area, and the White House has said Donald Trump warned his Turkish counterpart to avoid any actions that could bring US and Turkish troops into direct conflict. Well, let's have a closer look at what's happening in the region. This is the border between Turkey and Syria, and the areas in yellow are held by the various Kurdish militia. In the west, you can see the Afrin region there, and that's where the Turkish assault began. And to the east of it, this bit in green there, is where a number of Turkish-backed rebel groups are. They're involved in the push towards Manbij. There's a recap now that we're going to show you on how the operation has unfolded so far.
They are firing at us with tanks and warplanes. We did nothing to hurt them. We are protecting our land and they are bombing us.
We have to sleep here in the cellar because of the bombs. We are free to go out on the streets. What do they want from us? We are in our own land. They should stay in theirs.
No matter how many planes and missiles they send, this is our land and we will not leave it and do what Erdogan wants.
In retaliation for the operation, several missiles were fired from Afrin over the border into Turkey on Wednesday, killing 2 people in the town of Kilis and injuring a dozen more. A mosque and a residential building were damaged in the incident. International relations professor Hussein Bagchi told us Turkey and the US are on a collision course in Syria.
The talk between two presidents at the moment is not friendly, and Americans made certain, I would say, threat in political terms that Turkey should not extend the military operation. We have regional conflict on the one hand, but also an alliance conflict between 2 NATO countries. The American side was insisting on it that Turkey is not going to extend the operation. So this is somehow a warning by the Americans to the Turkish president. The confrontation between Turkey and the United States of America is getting more and more likely.